I'm looking forward to hearing him share his story. It was so wonderful to spend a little bit of time with you yesterday. We have all weekend to kind of connect. But anyway, we're just thrilled that you're here, Alan. We just bless you. And let's give a big hand for Alan.
Okay, I'm going to be the one who does it right from the beginning. You see where my hand is? I do learn from my mistakes and other people's as well, so we can talk a little bit about that as we go on. There's a lot that I could say. We could have a lock-in, I think, and fill the time completely with things that I could say. And there's going to be things that I don't say, and that's what I think Q&A is for. And you can ask the hard questions because my friend Darlene, who's sitting back there in the blue and the clerical collar, is going to ask a couple of those hard things. But I'll tell you, for those of you who have watched any part of my very messy and evolving journey unfold, which it continues to do so, and it only gets messier, is the thing that changed me most, the thing that has led me to stand before all of you today, which I am more humbled to stand in front of all of you than any group I've ever stood in front of in my life. The thing that changed everything for me was what Ken just talked about. I thought my entire life I was the prodigal. And when I stood on stages and I told my story and I shared my experiences, and my experiences were real and my story is true. My story hasn't changed. But I thought I was the prodigal. And there's an element of me that is. But what I didn't know, and what I would have never in a million years thought, was that there was any part of the older brother in me. I thought I knew God the Father in the way that I know Him now. And I didn't. I never thought gay people were going to hell. I never preached that message. That was never a part of anything that I thought or felt or believed. I grew up Southern Baptist, and once you know Jesus, you always know Jesus. But I didn't know God the Father was who He really is. I was not talking about the grace that was sufficient for me. The grace that isn't John MacArthur's church name, or the grace that so many people talk about in church, but the grace that says what Jesus did on the cross for all of us, He did completely. There's nothing else that we have to add to the mix. There's nothing else that we can do to make it better or more sufficient or more graceful or more gracious. What Jesus did, He completely did. And that began to change my heart completely. So my wife and I, a couple of years ago, we just began, and the cool thing about all of this is, I always consider, I'm kind of the renegade and the rebel, and I just make spur-of-the-moment decisions, and I'm a random, and I'm abstract, and which means I grew up feeling like that made me dumb, and I always had to kind of make up for it. But I married someone who is not like that. She makes lists, and she is concrete, and she's sequential, and she's smart, and she reads her Bible more than anybody I know, and she studies, and she is the real deal. She was the one who didn't smoke or drink or cuss or have sex or any of those things before we got married. I say before. And a couple of years ago, as God was doing this work in me, He was doing this work in her too. And as she is someone I absolutely respect and admire and love and trust, when she says something that God has said to her, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, more than anybody, what she's saying is true. And as God began doing this transformational, reformational work in my heart, God was doing the same work in her heart. And so it wasn't just me. I hadn't just slipped onto the slippery slope by myself. We always talked about gay marriage is the slippery slope and gay rights are the slippery slope. You guys have heard that, right? I'm not saying anything that's a surprise. And we were all afraid we were going to slip on the slippery slope, and lo and behold, I slipped on the slippery slope. And not only did I slip on the slippery slope, my wife slipped on the slippery slope as well. And it was a slippery slope of grace. It was the messy, sloppy agape grace that I always talked about being so dangerous. You know, it's not sloppy, it's not messy, it's not all of these things. And come to find out, it is. Hyper grace and sloppy grace. Is there any other kind? Is there anything else we want more than the sloppy, messy, hyper grace of Jesus? And so as my wife and I slipped onto that slippery slope and began sliding down together, the more we slid, the faster we went. And what we were realizing along the way was all of the things that we had shared. It wasn't that all of them weren't true, but we found along the way that there were a lot of things that weren't. Talk about a false gospel. We preached it. We preached a gospel that wasn't all-inclusive. We preached a gospel that wasn't finished. We preached a gospel that didn't allow for a lot of you and your families within it. And that, I'll tell you, that's hard. It was hard to realize, and it continues to be hard to realize. As I was sitting there thinking, before I got up here, I started thinking of all the things that have yet to be unsettled. Areas where I need to go further. Areas where I'm afraid to go further in my thoughts. Messy areas that are still just a little too messy for me. You know what I'm saying? But aren't we all in the same place? Don't we all find, maybe your messy area is just not running out of the room because I'm standing up talking in front of it. We all have this messy area that we're afraid to face. And one of the things that we began to realize was something that had to go, was something that we always wanted to go. Back in 2001, when I was sitting before the hiring committee at Exodus International, I think that year it was at a conference where I was being interviewed, and it was in Asheville, North Carolina. And the hiring committee asked me what success would look like for me as the president of Exodus. And I was very quick to say, success looks like Exodus going out of business because the church is doing its job. And what that meant to me at the time was for the church to be doing the work that Exodus was doing. For the church to be helping gay and lesbian people become free and to leave homosexuality and all of those things that we stood on stages and proclaimed were possible. All the years that I was at Exodus, our goal was always to put ourselves out of business. By 2011, we realized this might be the time. This might be the option that we have at this point to say, hey, maybe it is time to go out of business. And we began thinking about that. And it was scary, and we thought, probably not. 2012 rolled around, and we actually proposed it to all of our leaders. 250 of our leaders came at my call, and I said, we have a big meeting. We need to talk about some important things. And one of the things on the table was closing Exodus. And their response was absolutely not. And their response was absolutely not because they liked each other. And they felt we were a community. And I realized, you know what, if you don't have a community at home, then you're missing something. The reason not to close Exodus isn't because we don't like each other. That's a bad reason. We opted at that point to modify, and Exodus began to modify. And what that began to look like was all the things I had been afraid to say before, a lot of the things that I had always believed, I began saying. Things like 99.999% of the people I know haven't changed their sexual orientation. Or they don't still struggle, or they don't still have some sort of temptation towards things that they always had temptations towards. I began going places like the Gay Christian Network and hanging out and talking about how much easier a speaking engagement would be if I had a martini and a cigarette, which I still believe would be easier. Right before I got up, I thought, oh, I don't really smoke, but martinis I really like, and this would be easier with that. So, but we began being honest about those things, and the more time went on, the more we realized Exodus has no future. And it all began to culminate in April of 2013 when in March of 2013, when I called my friend Lisa Lane, who is now with CNN. I had been on her show 2 times previously, and she was kind of like this weird spiritual guide, if you will. She always talks about channeling Jesus, which I'm not sure if that's possible, but it works for her, and okay. So I called Lisa, and I said, I feel like you're my priest, Lisa, but I just need to ask you, I feel like I need to get some things off my chest and to share some things, and I don't even know all of what I need to share. But would you bring a camera and let me share it? Because I feel like it's not good enough to stand on a stage and just get the few people who are going to be in the room. But I really feel like I need to say some things to anybody who has an opportunity to turn on their computer or turn on their TV. And she said, absolutely. And if the Oprah Network won't do it, we'll do it with CNN. If CNN won't do it, we'll do it with NBC. She said, I definitely want to be a part of this. And so she pulled together this group of people without any of my help at all. And in April of 2013, just up the road in Hollywood, Leslie and I walked into the basement of the West Hollywood Presbyterian Church. The dark, dingy basement of this church. I thought this morning as I was thinking about it, it's the colon of that church. It was just ugly, which is just a disgusting picture, isn't it? But we walked into this awful place, which I found symbolic, because isn't that the only place that we've talked about these things in the church oftentimes? Is in the nasty belly of it. We walked into this room, and there was a horseshoe of chairs. And in that horseshoe of chairs were some people I knew, some who were dear friends. Lisa Ling in the middle. And then over here, where the 2 ends of the horseshoe came out, was a gallery of people that I didn't know, except for one person that we brought with us. And Leslie and I sat down, and there was a guy sitting there in purple pants, and I thought, I like those purple pants, and I'm going to say it out loud because I hope it breaks the tension, and it totally did. It was my martini in the moment. And we sat down, and that was probably the lightest moment of the 3 hours and 25 minutes that we were there talking on camera. It was the most gut-wrenching 3 hours and 25 minutes of my life. It felt like 40 years. And the only thing I knew God said for me to do when I walked into that room was to read what I had on the paper. And the only reason I wrote it was because I wanted to make sure everything was there. And the other thing he said to do was you just listen. Say what's on your paper and you listen. And if somebody asks you a question, answer it. But the majority of what I want you to do is just listen. And we sat there, and I listened, and I listened, and I listened. And we cried. Actually, my wife cried. I didn't cry. I was too afraid to cry. But I heard stories of torture and terror and horror. hated it. I hated hearing those stories. And I hated even more that some of those stories were stories I was involved in. And I prayed when that was over that I'd never have to go through anything like it again. But more than that, I prayed I would never, ever forget it. And to this day, I could sit and tell you who was in what chair, who was wearing what, and what they said. I could tell you their faces, I could tell you who cried when, and what it felt like. And one of the last things that happened was there was a guy named Jerry who asked me, so what is Exodus? Because I kind of explained, we're going through a transition, which was just a whole load of crap. We were. But he said, so what is Exodus? And I told him, and he said, but what does that mean? And so I tried to explain it. What I realized in that moment was I have no idea what the hell Exodus is. Can I say hell, church? In that way? Depends on what church, yeah. Those churches don't call me anymore. Yeah. I don't know, I kind of want to go, but I'll take all y'all with me.
Amen.
In that moment, I couldn't wait for it to be over because I had no idea what Exodus was anymore. And more than I didn't have any idea what Exodus was, I didn't really care. A couple of years earlier, a friend of mine's wife died. And before she died of breast cancer, she called her family in and she said goodbye to them, and she called her husband in last, and she said, looking in his eyes, grabbing his hand, she said, I want you to take me off your heart. And he said, I'll never take you off my heart. And she said, you have to take me off your heart if you're ever going to love again. In a very, very different way, I felt like in the process of sitting in that room, God was taking Exodus off my heart. Because I'll be very honest, Exodus saved my life. And it's hard to imagine that Exodus saved my life while destroying so many others. It's ironic. I don't know what to do with that. Exodus wasn't all bad. And I know that's debatable, especially in this room. And I won't belabor that point, but for me, Exodus represented a group of people that the church was not ready to be. Exodus simply showed up for me. Exodus didn't do a lot of the things in my life that other people experienced. My small world that I lived in the Exodus groups that I was involved in, they weren't horror stories. There was lots to pick on. There's lots to criticize. But for me, as an 18-year-old gay kid, I had nowhere else to go. I didn't know what a gay community was. I didn't know there was a group of people out there that I could turn to. I'm thankful for my story and the way it played out. But when God took Exodus off my heart, I was thankful. I was thankful Exodus was gone, was going, and I knew it had to go very quickly. And I knew unequivocally we had to say we were sorry for all the things that we did and didn't do. We had to say sorry for all the things that people before us did that we would have never thought of doing. We had to say we were sorry for the things that we did, and we had to be very specific about it. And I felt there was no other option but to list every single thing I could think of, every story I could hear, I had heard, and say, I'm sorry for these things, and this is what we're going to do about it. We're going to close the doors of Exodus, and we're not going to start again. And so that's what we did in June of 2013. And it was hard. The next morning I woke up. It was the worst morning I think I've ever felt in my life. I didn't know what to do with it. And it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. We were in Los Angeles. We were at the conference, or in Orange County at the conference where I had announced it the night before. And I was kind of tossing and turning and stressing out and thinking, what's my mom going to say? What are all of these people going to say? What's this person going to say? And I guess I was loud in my distress, but my wife, in her 4 o'clock morning voice, turned her head over and she said, "You did the right thing." No words have ever been more to me. And over the course of the next couple of months, when I would wake up in the middle of the night and I think, what did I do? I killed our livelihood. We were going to lose everything. What about these people that felt like I was saying this, but I wasn't saying that? And what about this group of people that felt like I was saying this, but I'm not saying that? And what about all these people? And I would toss and I'd turn in the middle of the night and I'd wake up, and just in the moment, whether I was tossing or turning or not, amazingly, this voice would whisper out, for months, "You did the right thing." And it was Leslie, just saying over and over again. And again, going back to that picture of who she is to me. She's not my spiritual leader. She's not this person that I think is more holy than me or any of those things, because to think that is to think something about the Father God that's not true, right? But she's different from me. Her story is different from mine. The way she reads the Bible is sometimes different than the way I do. The way I interpret things is different than the way she does. But when she would say, "You did the right thing," and what she meant was, we did the right thing. You didn't just do this by yourself. I did it with you. And we didn't just do this as renegade rebels. We followed the leading of the Holy Spirit to do what was right. And the right thing was to close this ministry down, and to make sure that we used our voice and whatever credibility we had left to say we were sorry and to make things right. Because the thing that we hated the most, and one of the things that changed us along the way as well, was all, especially the young people, a certain age group of kids that I had known personally within Exodus, who not only were calling me one by one or taking me out for coffee or whatever and saying, "Alan, I know you're going to be disappointed, but I'm gay," which never disappointed me. But then they would follow it up with, "And I decided I don't believe in God anymore." And I'd say, "Dang it. Be gay. Don't take God out of this." Finally, when you're able to be honest with yourself and you're able to be transparent, you're able to sit in front of me and say, "I'm gay," but then to have lost God in the process. And my response is always the same, and it was the last one that did that with me was the person who served as my personal assistant up until the very last day of Exodus. We sat down for coffee about a year ago now, and he said, "I just need to tell you I'm dating men." And I was like, "Duh, I'm not surprised. I am on Facebook. You've bought a lot of tank tops recently." And the second thing he said was, and this is something I would have never thought, the second thing he said was, "And I don't believe in God anymore." And my heart sank. I hoped that would end. I hoped that would stop. And I said, "Well, you know what? It's a good thing God didn't stop believing in you. So you did not believe in him, but you believed in him once, and that was good enough." So he said, "Well, if that makes you feel better," I said, "It makes me feel infinitely better." And so our journey really, we thought when closing Exodus, and I'll end with this, we thought when closing Exodus, well, you've had an organization and we know how to run an organization, so we'll just start another organization. We've closed down the bad one, we'll start a good one. And we came up with a name, and we started kind of putting together a website and a mission statement and all of those things. And about 3 or 4 weeks into it, someone called me on the phone one day, and in the tone of voice that I'm sure you can imagine. So what is your hiring policy going to be? And I said, you know what, I'm not doing an organization. I don't want another organization. I don't want a hiring policy. I want to partner with who I want to partner with. I don't want someone speaking for me, and I don't want to speak for anybody else. My wife and I are going to be Alan and Leslie Chambers, and we're going to just go out and do what God's called us to do. And that's meet with, hang out with, love on, be friends with, be in family with anybody who will welcome us to be in family with them, in community with them. And so that's what we've done. Skip the organization. We have a website, we have some stuff, and people email and all of those things. But what we've decided to do was we're going to use what we have left, whether it's our reputations, which is gone, or the money that we have left, to just simply do what I feel like God's calling us to do, and that's just hang out with people and listen to people's stories. We're writing a book, and we finished our draft in July, and we turned it in to Zondervan, which is our publisher, and Zondervan hired an outside editor, and my wish was granted that it was an editor that was much more liberal than we are. And she read the book, and she sat down and she wrote some notes, and one of the things she said was, yeah, this is fine. You know, it's kind of a take the log out of your eye and before you remove the splinter from your brother's eye. She said, that's fine, but you don't need a book for that. She said, nobody wants to hear your opinion, Alan, frankly. She said, just tell your story. Tell your story, and your opinion might show up in there, but nobody wants to hear your opinion. Save your opinion for later, just tell your story. And I feel like that's kind of the year we've had. The last 18 months have been, I don't know what my opinion is on most days. I wake up and I think, third way, God, aren't there like 50 shades of gray? And I don't know, there are things that I don't know. You could ask me a question and I might hem-haw because I don't know how to answer it, frankly. I was with a group of friends in Grand Rapids a few weeks ago, Justin Lee and Wesley Hill and a bunch of the people who kind of make up an interesting conglomeration of people. And Justin was talking about side A and side B, and I remember just sitting there thinking, I'm not either. I don't want to be on a side anymore. I don't want to draw a line in the sand anymore. In fact, if you ask who I'm more comfortable with, I'm probably far more comfortable today with side A people than I am with side B people. Side B people don't like me. I'm not sure side A people do, but I don't want to be on a side. I don't want to draw a line. I don't want to have a debate or a divide. I want to be on side Jesus and figure out who he wants to eat with and who he wants to hang out with and hang out with those people, whether we're drinking tea or a martini. And so that's really what we've decided to do. And I said I was going to close with something, but I'm going to close with this. This is my true story. This is where we live today. Leslie and I, when I leave here, we are going home to a week of packing up our house. We have rented out our house because we can't afford to live there anymore. And we've sold a car because we can't afford to have two anymore. And we are moving in with my mother-in-law, which at 42 is not my favorite thing. And she has a big house, and she lets me decorate it, and I'm going to go to that. In many parts of my life, I feel like a big failure. But in the part where God asked me to do something for people, I feel like I did something right for a change. And I don't know what that looks like going forward, but I know Leslie and I are in it together, and I'm so thankful, and more thankful than that, I'm thankful that our kids get to watch. I'm thankful that my kids get to watch us do some of the hardest things that we've ever had to do. That they know the words I love you, and that they know the words I'm sorry, because we taught them those things. And that they know what it's like to give up everything because you believe in something bigger. So I don't know what life looks like from here on out. I know we're going to keep telling our true story, and I know our true story is going to continue to evolve. What I feel like is I want to hang out with people like you all the time. And I'll go a step further. You guys like Jesus. I want to hang out more with people who don't. I want to hang out with people who feel like Jesus doesn't like them. I want to tell people how much Jesus not only likes them, but loves them, no matter what. So that's my true story. And that's where I live today. And it's messy, and it's going new places, but I've never in my life felt so free. So thanks for letting me share.